Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode, edition, whatever the right word is, of Stakeholder Whispering Live. I'm Bill Shander, and I'm happy to have with me today Ronnie Gibson, who I've known for, how long have we known each other, Ronnie? 5, 6, 7 years, something like that?
It's probably longer, I'm afraid.
Maybe it's
Time
been more
flies,
longer than
right?
that. Yeah, it really does. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years.
It's
Um,
it's a while, right?
so Ronnie is with a company called, it's not called FM Global anymore. Is it just called FM now? Is that officially the name?
It's FM now. Yeah, we changed the
Yeah.
brand just last year. Yeah, because that's what everybody has called us since I joined.
Yeah.
So it's
So why don't you tell us a little bit about, who you are, what you do, background, a quick
yeah,
introduction.
sure. So Ronnie Gibson, I work with FM, as we already said. Who are FM? FM is an insurance company. Most people haven't heard of it because actually we specialize in industrial risk insurance. So it's only the property and the profits from basically large manufacturing organizations around the world. So it's a pretty unique niche insurance world. I work in the capacity of brand experience and engagement. Now, full disclosure, I've been with FM for 38 years now, so I've worked in a whole series of different roles and different jobs over that time. But now I focus on how our clients and our partners experience the brand of FM. So yeah, I guess the only other thing I would want somebody to know if they're not familiar with me and what I do would be that the role I'm in is basically focused on creating experiences and delivering those experiences. And in layperson's language, that's things like tours and briefings and corporate events and things like that. So before you even ask me the first question, Bill, I can tell you, when it comes to stakeholders, yes, lots of them all the time. And I don't know how much whispering I do, but there's a lot of it. So
That's great. Thank you. And I don't know if you experienced this just now while you were talking, kind of glitched out and then disappeared
yeah,
for a while and came
yeah.
back. Yeah. Okay. So I don't know
Oh,
if anybody heard any of that. And I think it may have been the entire thing was down. So apologies, everybody.
oh, okay,
Um, maybe we can redo that introduction just real quick. So you're with
okay,
FM and tell us again. I'm sorry, just in
okay.
case.
So if it was live, go and get yourself a quick cup of coffee. If it wasn't, Uh, here I go again. I work for a company called FM. It's a large industrial insurance company, as in they only insure industrial risks. It's pretty unique and niche in that factor. It's not like what you and I would buy car and home insurance. So it's typically large manufacturing industrial risk. And my role within that is I'm responsible for what we call brand experience and engagement. So in that capacity, I am focused on, and I have a team. It's not just little Ronnie here doing this, but we're focused on creating and delivering experiences that support the brand. And I don't mind telling anybody that it's a fascinating area to work in, because if you think about it, any brand that you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis or even occasionally, it is an experience. And the question you have to ask yourself is it appropriate or worthwhile for that to be an intentional experience? So, think of, I mean, if you think of something as easy as like cars that you might drive, those organizations, they pay a lot of attention to, the sound when the door opens, or the curve of the metal, which suggests whether it's thick metal or thin metal, by the way. All of these things, they have departments that think about this because that's all part of the experience. And we do the same thing because we've got a pretty complicated equation when it comes to it in terms of dealing with our clients, because they're all over the world. They have different types of risks. There's all kinds of potential solutions. And therefore we need to do work to make sure that it all stitches together for them.
That's great. One of my favorite things about FM, because I found out about them because I did work for Ronnie and other people over there, was that the sprinkler system, like the sprinkler system for manufacturing facilities, but sprinklers generally, right, came
Mhm.
from the guy who founded the company, right? Like essentially, like it was
Yeah,
invented by that guy, right? So
yeah, yeah.
you
He
talk about
was,
brand, right? That brand was
yeah,
this guy came up with this thing that that it makes sense to protect the buildings, buy the insurance, but we'll protect it, and then everybody's happy.
yeah,
FM Factory Mutual Insurance Company, which I had heard of, but then it sort of evolved the
yeah.
brand over the years. So it's interesting how these things evolve.
Yeah, yeah, and such a simple, simple concept, really. At the end of the day, I mean, he
Yeah,
basically, like he was a factory owner, and he just said, I'm going to do these things to make my place safer, in the general term, so to speak. And when he went to his insurance company and asked for a rate cut, they said, that's not how this works. So
mm,
he essentially formed a club with a bunch of other factory owners, and that's the Factory Mutual Insurance
yeah,
Company was born. Like it is so simple when you hear it said that way.
yeah,
Fast forward to today when you were talking global multinationals with all kinds of supply chain issues, et cetera, et cetera. But it's really
yeah,
just a more complicated version of the same thing. Yeah. So
yeah. Which, by the way, is actually a stakeholder whispering story in a way. It's like, well, what do you need? I need insurance. Well, no, you don't need insurance. What you need is protection
right,
from risk.
right,
That's a
right.
that's a whole different story. Maybe insurance is the tool. Maybe a sprinkler is the
Oh,
tool. Maybe some other tools are the tool. But protection from risk is really what you need.
absolutely. And just to prove that nothing in these things is that plan. So in a prior life, so to speak. So in my early days working for FM, I used to visit these factories, and it was a very interesting exercise when you got to the end of one of those visits, and you would be talking with a factory manager about the exposures and risks that you had seen. And part of my job, actually, at the time, and you're reminding me of it from what you just said, was to try and get a read on what is it that matters to this man or woman in front of me right now. And very often it wasn't a case of, oh, I want to make sure I don't have an insurance claim. It was something completely different. It would be, we are part of the center of a community was a very common thing. And, in a lot of towns and cities, some of these companies, there's an ecosystem in place around that factory that's doing the core manufacturing. And you'll find that the senior management, they're very aware of that. They could be the third generation running this plant. And they would know that if this place burned down for whatever reason, that people would be without work. People who don't work at that factory would be without work. And I've had people say this
Yeah,
to me in the closing conference, as we used to call it, at the end of a visit. And it was it was a disarming moment by the one hand, but on the other hand, apropos what we're talking about, in terms of positioning any recommendation I might have, um, understanding that and hearing that from the stakeholder firsthand put me in a much better position to offer good advice that would resonate, to basically meet the agenda, you know, of that factory manager in that case.
yeah,
And
that
and
makes sense.
today I would say, Bill, I do the same thing, only for bunches, groups of factory managers who come in, or even our own managers.
Yeah, that's great. You were actually telling me before we went live about another story from early in your career that had sort of some relevance here. So maybe you can share that with our audience.
Are we talking about the infamous Alfie? When I was that
Alfie, yes.
so full disclosure, when we were chatting before, I was talking about my early, and I mean early career. I used to once work as a clothes salesman in a clothing store. And on like the first or second day, I was introduced to the top salesman. Alfie was his name, and he was quite a character. And he did the numbers. He sold more than anybody at the time, so he was a bit of a little legend in the town where I grew up. But I vividly remember watching him sell to a young man who came into the store, and this chap was going to a college event that evening, and I remember watching Alfie talking to him, and he used to always say, his line was, just listen to the customer, and you know the sales, they'll take care of themselves. And of course that sounded glib, but as I watched him in action, it was interesting because this guy came in and he was looking to buy a suit to go to this event. And he walked out of the store with a pair of slacks, a nice shirt, and a pullover or a sweater. And as this all unfolded, what Alfie was doing was he got into this whole conversation around, well, you want to look good, right? But you don't want to look too good. Like, so if you go in this suit, then you're kind of going to look like you're there to make a grand impression. And you don't really want to do that. You do want to make an impression, right? But you don't want to make this over the top impression. And the two of them were chatting backwards and forwards. And basically, the lesson I took away from it, which I would say any of us can apply today, the lesson back then for me was, if you listen closely to the underlying need of that individual, then you have a much better chance of delivering what they want. Because, this guy came in and said, I want to buy a suit. And he walked out without anything close to a suit, but he walked out with what he needed. He walked out believing, and probably did get the result that he sought at the end of the day, which was, to have a thing, to look good, to feel good, all of that stuff. And, any of us who are men on the call who are old enough to remember when we wore suits don't always feel that comfortable, do they?
That's very true. Someone described to me, and now I can't remember who it was. It might have been in one of these calls. Somebody said that the way to think about it is, I think it was Tom Daly, a guest from 2 weeks ago. He said, they own the problem, you own the solution. So in other words, the kid owned the problem. Like he knew he needed to show up with this thing, and he needed to be comfortable, but needed to feel good about himself, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the solution to that was in Alfie's hands. You don't need a suit, you need something else. And the way Alfie extracted that is, like you said, deep listening, which we were also talking about, this idea that there's sort of two levels of listening, as you described it.
Right. And, and if it were you and me, and you have the problem and I have the solution, then it's on me to fully understand the problem. Because if you think about it, if I sell, so one of the things that I do a lot of in my job currently is I do what we call tours, which is a terrible word for it. I would prefer to use the term briefing. So we have a large research campus, and I get to show clients and partners around this research campus. And it's the same facility every time that I show them around. As in, there are labs and there are experiments that I can show people. And people I can introduce them to, so they have an understanding of the research work that we do. But what I'm getting at is, if that is my offering to you, Bill, say, and you're bringing me a problem, well, I can just do a tour and it's interesting. It doesn't get you to the answer that you're seeking, or it doesn't get you the result you're seeking. So it's on me to ask enough questions and listen closely enough to understand, what is it you're trying to solve here? And then what I can do is I can show you around the same facility, but we can turn up the volume, as I call it, on the parts of this that are most resonant for you or most relevant to you, and that are most likely to help you get to where you want to go. Because if you think about it, a stakeholder, when they bring their problem to the table, they probably already have an idea of the solution they want. And in many cases, that's why they've come to you. And it's kind of like, oh, well, Ronnie, if you just show me around, then this magic will happen and everything will be solved. But that, frankly, isn't the case. It's only by, getting into the weeds and understanding what it is you're trying to solve, that I have any chance, even though you've had an inkling of it. It's almost like, you can buy the minivan, or you can buy the convertible. It depends, it's my job to figure out, what is it that you need? Do you have a family that you need to bring around, here? Or is it just you going down to the Sunshine State kind of thing? And teasing that out.
It's funny, like if luckily, this kid went to it sounds like sort of more of a department store type of store where there were different options. If he had gone just to a suit store, he could have been in trouble, right? And so It's actually funny. We have a
That's a great
comment
point.
here from Karen Klinger, who was actually a guest on this show a few weeks back. Karen's great. She said, I love that idea. They own the problem, I own the solution. But what happens when the solution I offer is rejected? Which is a great question
I
because that
love it.
happens all the time. You're not going to win every stakeholder whispering discussion. It's not going to always work out. So what's your advice, Ronnie? What do we
Yeah,
do
yeah.
when it's rejected?
Well, and sometimes that happens, and I mean, I don't know this person personally, but here's where I would come from with that. My first, I'll give two answers if that's all right. The first answer would be making an assumption that if it's me who has the solution, that I've already decided this solution and I want you to implement my solution. And then, of course, you reject it. All that really means is um, that I've fallen into the trap, frankly, of thinking my solution is the solution when really it's not. So my counsel would be, okay, let's say you, Bill, had rejected my, the solution I'd offered to you. I think I would then immediately revert to, well, hey, is it okay if I ask some more questions? Because it appears like maybe I haven't fully understood what it is that you're trying to achieve here. Um, and I see that happen, that show up in my life pretty regularly. In that, what I'll find is I'll be dealing with an executive who is trying to do a particular solve a particular risk for a client. And when we dig into it, that risk is kind of like the tip of the iceberg, or it's almost like a diversion. In the way that I was saying earlier, when I would be talking to a factory manager and I would be in there thinking, oh, well, they want to make sure they don't have an insurance claim. And they would be like, no, 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 no. I want to make sure that all of these people whose families I know have jobs for life. That's a very different thing. And, at
Mhm.
the time when I would make that mistake, um, there's a way of coming back to it. And I guess my headline answer would be, it's time to go back and say, can I ask some more questions here? Can you read?
Mhm.
And sometimes for me too, I've done this where I've said, can we restart this? Start again. Tell me what it is that you're trying to do here. Um, Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't the rare occasions when actually the smart thing to do is to say, actually, this is not the solution for that. And um, I'll well, can I shift gears on this? I mean, this is pretty free form conversation, but I
Yeah, yeah, of
mentioned
course.
earlier that I've done different jobs. So there was a while when I ran a training group, actually also in FM. And one of the traps we would fall into would be, it would be a case of we might have, say, a large loss at a client that was very particular. And the knee jerk reaction, on an individual level, to be fair, I would hear people in a meeting occasionally say, oh, well, we need to have training on this. And
Mhm.
the knee jerk reaction from me would be, oh, well, we'll put on a class where we teach everybody this risk again. Um, but sometimes when you would go back and say, okay, well, let's look at this a little more closely and say, is the issue here that the people didn't know what to do, or was the issue that for whatever reason they didn't actually do what we would have hoped they would do? If it's the
Mhm.
former, that's training. If it's the latter, that's not training. It's not that people didn't know. And sometimes, like I say, it can be hard to tell the difference in the
Yeah.
moment. So, going back to the original question here, sometimes in the moment, it's really handy to consciously and overtly step back and say, "Can we start this again? Explain to me what you're trying to achieve here," because we're all human. I do this too. Somebody says, "Oh, I want to solve this problem and I think I have the solution."
Yeah. What's funny, in the book, I talk about the idea that, our clients, our stakeholders don't always know what they need. So they ask for a suit when really they need and experience a
Right.
good night out and feeling a good way, a certain way.
Yep.
But that applies to us too. So like I'm a hammer, so everything looks like a nail. So yeah, like I do what I do, so I expect the solution to look like that, and so I may be pushing something that may not be exactly what's needed, and therefore, yeah, revisiting it, rethinking it as you described it is a good answer.
Yeah.
I'm going to add a third answer, which I also do talk about in the book, which is then the phrase that I use is one of my favorite phrases in this context is my clients pay me to tell them no once. So in other words, I'm an expert in what I do. People hire me to do that. And maybe I came up with a great solution. Maybe it is the best possible solution. And sometimes they say no to that and they picked a bad idea. And I'll try to convince them, this is actually a better way to do it. This is a really better way to do it over here, over here, over here. And they're going to say, no, do it this way anyways. And sometimes, you just got to do what you're told. And even though this
Yeah.
book is all about not doing what you're told, pushing back against that, trying to encourage people to really focus on what should be done, sometimes they're just going to reject it, and
Yeah.
you just got to live
Yeah.
with it because they are the stakeholder.
And yeah, I love that actually, because I mean, what you're getting at is right back to the core of this, which is, does that person know what it is they're trying to achieve
Yeah.
here? I was in my own world. So if you think about it, a lot of my world is showing clients around facilities, doing briefing sessions, et cetera, et cetera. And one, I don't know that I would call it a failure, but it talks to what you're talking about. Was you remember a few years ago, everybody was into the whole virtual reality thing, and we had these headsets. And anyway, somewhere along the line, somebody said at a senior level, "Hey, we should be introducing these headsets." And I went along with that. We got these headsets, we created these experiences, and I thought they were pretty good until people put them on their head, and then I'd lost them. It was like I'd locked them in a room and told them to watch a movie. So there was no way for me to be there and see their reaction and understand the context or guide them, in terms of what they were seeing. And to your point, really, the expectation was, look, here's an order. Let's include this technology in our briefings. And we did a great job of including that technology, but it did not make the briefing better. It did not make it
Yeah.
more effective. And we don't use that anymore, because actually, in the world that I operate in, it's very much person to person, face to face, having a live discussion, just like we are now. Because really, the individuals who were saying, let's use this technology, they were focusing on a specific thing that they thought they wanted.
Right.
When really, if I'd said, oh, well, we can use this tech, of course, I didn't know this either at the time, but if I had been able to see the future and was able to say, well, if we use this technology, we then don't achieve this other much more important goal that you're seeking, which is
Yeah.
to shift somebody's mindset or to get them to understand the risk better. They would have said, oh no, let's not do that. But
Yeah.
neither of us really understood that, and we just went with the order. And hey, we live and learn.
Technology, it's like heroin. It's like once you've tasted it, everyone's like, oh my God, must have more of that, must
Yeah,
add more of whatever
yeah,
the coolest, newest thing is, we must have that in our
yeah,
experience. And
yeah.
you know what? Listen, like for the most part, it's bad like heroin, right? Too bad outcomes. But
Yes.
occasionally the technology is so important and compelling. And even though you don't know why or how it's going to be useful, you kind of have to go down that pathway. Like, and I think AI is one of those situations. Like everyone's
Yeah.
baking AI into everything right now because it's so transformative. And part of me is like, oh my God, that's like so stupid. Here we go again, just like VR and everything else. We're
Mm.
just going to use it and then realize it was a waste of time. Except that AI is so transformative and so different and so I can't think of another word better than transformative. It
Mm.
probably is good that people are experimenting with it as much as they are, because we're all gonna have to figure out how it really is gonna be useful in all
Yeah.
of our
Yeah.
contexts, because it is gonna be baked into everything.
I agree. And I would say also, in its infant stage, which is really what it is right now, it's still pretty good. And I think it's
Yeah,
also pretty useful for those of us who find ourselves dealing with, multiple stakeholders. Because one other thing that I learned years ago that's just come back to me as you were chatting about this is stakeholders love options. They love choice. And
yeah,
again, not in a disingenuous way, but it kind of goes back to that earlier question. if I were hiring somebody new and giving them some coaching, I would say never go in with just one solution. Go in with
Yeah.
options, and they need to be options that will work. And of course, if you want to get manipulative, I don't mind sharing. My technique always is I'll come to you, Bill, and I'll say, here are these three options. All of these will work. If it were me, I'd do this option. But of course, the choice is yours.
Yeah.
Trust me, you're going to pick the one that I
Yeah.
recommend. No, and I'm saying that, slightly tongue in cheek. But one of the
Yeah.
great things about AI that I'm already seeing for myself is that I can have an idea, I can use simple tools in Copilot or whatever AI tool you choose to use, where you can literally say, here's what I'm thinking of doing. Can you suggest three other versions of this or alternatives, or and sometimes it'll come up with something crazy, but what
Yeah.
it does is it's a great vehicle to feed people like you and I and the people who'll be listening to this, to feed us ideas that even though they may not be a fully formed option, they can open the door to, let me see if I can develop something here as an option for my client or boss or whoever it is.
Yeah. No, that's great. I think it's a great way of thinking about AI today. And who knows what
Oh,
it's going to
right.
look like 3 days from now, never mind 3 years from now.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, well, this is great, Ronnie.
Sure.
I really appreciate your being here and talking with us. Any final words of wisdom if you had to sum it all up in a little pithy statement? But boy, no pressure though.
No. I think reflecting back on everything we've just said, I think it does all come back to listening, and as I like to say to friends, listen with your ears, not with your brain, because you know the way. The way you're in a conversation, and you and I, we've been doing this right now. It's normal human
Yeah.
nature. I'll be talking about something, and you're listening to me, but you're also processing, and you're kind of processing and saying, oh, what do I think of what he's just said, etc., etc. So on a certain
Yeah.
level, we tune in and out. And I think when you're dealing with a stakeholder, you have to be tuned in.
Yeah.
If you start applying your own bias or your own thought process before you fully understand what they're saying, you're letting yourself down, really, because you're missing data, because
Yeah.
you're not really listening anymore. So yeah, that would be it. Listen hard, listen with your ears.
Which, by the way, just brings us right back to AI, because one of the best things about AI is it lets you fully listen and somebody else has taken the notes, right? Because like when we're taking notes,
Right.
I'm way slow when I'm taking notes, and now somebody else can take the notes, the AI can take the notes, and I'm
Yeah,
actually truly listening the entire time. So
yeah,
yeah,
and
I like that.
yeah, yeah. I don't know. Do you use those tools?
I just started when I wrote the book. I used AI for all the interviews I did. I interviewed a bunch of people, and the transcripts were far from perfect, but this was now 10 months ago. I bet they're way better now than they were
they're
then, and they were
they're
pretty darn good. They were good enough.
they're
So
exceptional. Now you can get transcripts
yeah,
and summaries, and
yeah,
and again,
and the summaries are pretty good.
yeah,
Yeah.
right, yeah, yeah.
All
So
right. Well, thanks
anyway,
again, Ronnie. It's been great talking to you.
it's
And
been a
for
pleasure.
everybody else, we'll be back again next week.
Okay,
Thank you, Ronnie.
take care.
All right.